Hey, it's Louise's Bible study again, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the life of Joseph. I love Joseph. I think Joseph was a type of Jesus. And in the Old Testament, we have shadows and types of what needs to take place in the New Testament. And the life of Joseph, I mean, there is so much wealth in his story. And I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of it and pick out some points. But Joseph was the youngest child of several children, actually, and he was sort of the last child of his father and his mother, and they loved him. He was really great in their eyes. And Joseph was 17 years old, and he was feeding his flock with his brothers, and he had a vision. He had a dream, and in this dream, he saw himself ruling over his brothers and his family. And in the meantime, his mother had made him what is called a coat of many colors. We think of it as being a coat with all these different colors, but really the colors were on the sleeve. But it was a really lovely coat, and it was sort of a standout. It would be like if your father gave everybody else a little Volkswagen, and then when you came along, he gave you a Mercedes. And so the brothers were not thrilled with Joseph and his coat of many colors. And, if you want to know sibling jealousy, it is one of the worst jealousies. And boy, it can put a root of bitterness in you that will destroy your life. And I see so much of that, people being jealous of their brothers and sisters and competing in the family for the father or mother's attention. And in this instance, Joseph told this dream to his brothers, which was a very immature thing. If God gives you a dream about or tells you something about his plans for your life in the future, maybe you need to sit on it and not go telling everybody about it. Because when you do that, sometimes you open doors of animosity and jealousy, and it'll come back, it'll be a blowback on you, and it was a blowback on Joseph. And so his brothers got together and decided, they were just going to do away with him. And their idea was they want to kill him. So one day he went out to check on them as they were tending the flock of sheep, and they threw him in a pit. I'm making this story very simple. But they threw him in a pit. And then not only was it bad enough that they threw him in this pit, but they sat around the pit eating and drinking and laughing and mocking him down there in this pit. And the idea was that we're going to kill him. They really wanted to kill him. But one brother stood up. He hung around. He said, no, you go home. I'll take care of this, okay? And y'all go on, because he didn't want to kill his brother. So he, had a goat or an animal killed, smeared the blood on the coat and took it back and said, okay, Joseph has been killed. And but what they had done was they sold him. They sold him to a caravan that was coming along, and they sold him into Egyptian slavery. And, now you got to think about this. One, his brothers threw him in a pit. They wanted to kill him, but one brother stood in his stead and said, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, they all thought he had, but he hadn't. Then they take him and throw him to the wolves by selling him into the Egyptians' slavery. And so he ends up in Potiphar's house. Potiphar is a very wealthy man. And he has a lot of standing in the Egyptian community, I guess you could say. And Joseph was such a good servant. He had such a good attitude. And he He did everything that he was supposed to do for Potiphar, and he was so efficient and so good at what he did that Potiphar put him in charge of his affairs in his home. But what he didn't know was that Potiphar had a wife that was, she was a real trip. And you're talking about lusting and having a really evil sexual craving for any man. And Joseph was good looking. He was a really good looking guy. And she kept putting the moves on him, and he kept pushing her back, because Joseph was a very godly young man. And he kept pushing her back, and he kept pushing her back. And then one day Potiphar was gone on a trip, and she caught Joseph in the bedroom, and she tried to entice him to her bed. And Joseph was just so horrified that he fled from the room, and she kept his coat, and he fled out of the room. And though when her husband came back, rather than let the servants tell on her, she told her husband that Joseph tried to rape her. And so, of course, Potiphar, he wasn't going to listen to Joseph, although I can't imagine that the man didn't know what the wife was like. But, some people will rather go with the false than to go with the truth. Go figure. But anyway, he believed the wife, and so he sent Joseph to prison. And then now Joseph has gone from being the servant to the prison, and he's down here in the prison. But you know what? His attitude was so good, and he decided to make the best of whatever situation he was in. And so he became the best prisoner in the jail. And he was so good that the jailers put him in charge of a lot of the jail, whatever was going on in the jail. And so he had been promoted. And then again, the king had a vision, and Joseph had told two of the guys that had been thrown down in the jail with him what the vision was about. And long story short, they lied on Joseph. They got out, and then the king found out that the one who really had the goods and knew what he was doing was Joseph. All right? So what am I saying? I'm putting this down into the everyday language. Joseph was promoted in a day by the king to being second in charge of the whole Egyptian nation. And Joseph was so wise in what he learned from God and what God told him. He told the king, he says, you need to put away grain for the next 3 or 4 years, because you're going to have a famine, and everybody's going to come to us, and they're going to be looking for food. And you need to store this food away. And he did. The king did it. In the days of prosperity, he listened to Joseph, and he stored the food away. And sure enough, a famine came, and everybody came from other nations. And guess who showed up in front of Joseph? Joseph is standing there, and he's dishing out all of this food and has all this, importance. And he looks there, and there is his brother. His brothers that threw him into a hole, and then wanted to kill him, and then sold him into slavery. And Joseph just looked at him, and he said, go get my youngest brother and bring him to me. As the story ends, not only did the youngest brother, but his father came, the whole family came. And then they finally realized that this was Joseph, the one they had hated so much. And sure enough, as the dream had said, they were bowing down in front of Joseph. The dream took a long time to come to pass. What am I saying in all of this? Some of you have been given a vision by God of the things he wants to do in your life, and things he wants to promote you to, and things he wants you to accomplish. But there is a process between the time you receive the dream and to the time you get the answer. And in this process, There is going to be ups and there are going to be downs and there are going to be ups and there's going to be downs. But what was the one factor that kept Joseph to maintain until he got his answer to his dream? His attitude. What is your attitude toward God? Somebody told me one day they weren't mad at me because I had told them something God had, but they were mad at God. And I thought, boy, I tell you what, you really want to get into trouble, get mad at God. God is not your problem. God is your answer. And you are your problem. And so they were looking and kept looking at the situation, and God was saying, here, I've got the answer over here, but you're going to have to go through a maturing, growing up process. And in this process, it can be painful sometimes. But what God is perfecting in you is His character. And God is so wanting His character to be developed in you. And the only way character can be developed is through trials and tribulation, and how you handle them, how you deal with them. And who do you run to? Do you run to God? Do you run to His Word? Or do you run away from Him? And I just want to leave this with some of y'all, because some of you have really been facing some real difficult situations. And you're getting impatient with God. You're feeling like He doesn't care. He isn't listening to you. He hears you. But He wants you to develop the right attitude when you don't always see the answer immediately. Because sometimes getting the answer immediately is not a faith-building process. And so you've got to be in here for the long haul, and you've got to make a decision. Is God true to His Word? Is He true to His promise? Is He going to pull through on what He told me? Or do I just throw the towel in? Because the promise is just about ready to be completed. It's just about ready to come to pass. And you are just at that point where it has gotten so difficult, you want to throw the towel in. Don't quit. Don't throw the towel in, because you are just about to cross over into your promise. And I just want to encourage some people, have some tenacity, have some stick-to-itness. Don't always look for the easy out, but look at the long picture and be willing to put time in for what it takes to receive the promises of God in your life. And this is an encouraging word. And go back and study the life of Joseph. Read it for yourselves. Read it over and over again, because it's such a wonderful story of somebody who never blamed God. He never blamed God. He never let a root of bitterness get in his life. He had the right attitude. And if you keep the right attitude, just like Joseph, in a day, God can change you from being in a prison to being the ruler of a nation. That's my God. I love every one of you. Be encouraged. Bye-bye. A lot of distractions.